Ever get that feeling? Like when you're reading something and it's familiar, sure, but there's this like a hidden depth to it.
Oh, absolutely.
Like there's got to be more to this story. That's what I'm getting from this Harriet Emily Bartlett book, An Esoteric Reading of Biblical Symbolism.
Yeah.
You sent this over, definitely piqued my interest. It's like cracking a code, right?
It's fascinating stuff. Bartlett basically says the Bible's packed with esoteric symbolism.
Okay.
Like it's encoded with deeper truths about, well, spirituality and how we evolved.
So not your typical Sunday school interpretation, though.
Not even close.
Yeah.
Bartlett wants us to look beyond, the literal stories, to think about what they mean symbolically,
Okay.
like Adam and Eve. Right. But instead of two people in a garden, she's seeing them as, like representations of where we are in our spiritual journey, as humans.
So Adam and Eve aren't just hanging out, they're symbolic.
Exactly. There's this duality in human nature.
Yeah.
We can grow spiritually, but there are also these traps we can fall into.
Interesting. And she takes this symbolic approach with, like, everyone else in Genesis, too.
Oh, yeah. Cain and Abel, not just brothers.
Mm-hmm.
They're the two paths humanity can choose, right?
Okay.
Cain, he's all envy and violence, super focused on stuff, on material things. Abel, though, he represents a life led by spiritual ideas.
So less about historical facts and more about these struggles we all deal with.
Exactly. And then there's the Tower of Babel. Man, that one always gets me.
What does she say about that?
Bartlett, she interprets it as, like, our own consciousness being fragmented.
Oh, wow.
How we put up walls, literally and figuratively, and it separates us.
From each other and maybe from, like, our spiritual selves.
You got it. And see, Bartlett uses all these bigger esoteric concepts. One of the big ones is root races and subraces.
Okay, root races sounds a little out there. What's that all about?
Think of it this way. Humanity is like, say, a garden, evolving over different seasons. Each season, that's a root race, a stage in our development as a species.
Okay.
Each one has unique traits, challenges, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And within those are the subraces, adding even more to the picture.
So humanity's on this, like, grand cycle of spiritual evolution.
Exactly. And Bartlett uses this to explain why history seems to repeat itself. Civilizations rise and fall. You have that push and pull between the material world and the spiritual.
So we've got these symbolic people and this framework of root races. Where does Noah's Ark fit into all of this?
Ah, now it gets good. Bartlett doesn't see the flood as just some event that happened. For her, it's a huge shift between these root races.
Okay.
A cosmic reset button wipes the slate clean for a new phase of spiritual growth.
Talk about starting over.
Right. Just goes to show that growing spiritually isn't a straight line, it's a cycle. We advance, then things get shaken up, we transform. And to really get what she's saying about this, it helps to understand another big concept, the triune nature of God.
You mean the Trinity. Okay, now you're talking. Always found that idea fascinating, if a little tricky to wrap my head around. How does she interpret it?
Bartlett sees the Lord Jehovah, Jesus, and the Christ, not as, separate beings, but as different parts of one divine force. Each plays a crucial part in humanity's evolution.
So not three distinct beings, but different expressions of the divine.
Exactly. The Lord Jehovah is the God of creation, the one who set those universal laws in motion, like karma, cause and effect, all of that. Then you have Jesus, and he represents love, compassion, how the soul develops. And lastly, the Christ symbolizes that ultimate spiritual wisdom, that spark of the divine within us all.
Each part of the Trinity is like a stage in our own spiritual development.
Precisely. And those covenants with Abraham, Bartlett sees those as directly tied to humanity's spiritual initiation and us waking up to our higher consciousness.
It's really something, Bartlett takes these stories we think we know and finds whole new levels of meaning.
It's pretty amazing.
And she doesn't just stop at those big narratives. She dives into, like, the actual lives of those biblical figures too, right?
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting, because she suggests that some of them, people we might think we already know, could actually be seen as incarnations of Jesus and Christ.
Hold on. Incarnations. Like, they come back throughout history.
That's what Bartlett's proposing.
Wow. So these aren't just one-time stories. These epic teachers, they could have popped up more than once.
Precisely. Think about Isaac, Abraham's son. That whole sacrifice thing takes on a new meaning when you look at it this way.
Okay.
It becomes less about, what literally happened and more about the kind of surrender, that dedication you need for spiritual growth.
So it's less about Isaac himself and more about what he represents, like sacrificing your ego for something bigger.
Exactly. Or look at Joshua taking the Israelites into the Promised Land. Bartlett, She sees that as like how spiritual teachers guide us toward higher consciousness.
So the promised land isn't so much a place, it's more like a state of being.
You got it. A state of spiritual awakening.
It's wild how these old stories can still hit home, you know? Makes you wonder if maybe we still see those same types of people, the wise ones, the guides, in our own lives.
Absolutely. Even someone like Samson, who's usually this super strong hero,
Oh, right.
Bartlett, she sees his strength as a symbol of spiritual power. But the fact that he fell, that's a reminder that even the strongest among us can get lost, especially if we forget what our spiritual purpose even is.
Oh, that's a good point. A good reminder for all of us. It's like no matter how far you've come, you can still trip up.
Right. It shows these stories aren't just ancient history. They have wisdom we can still use today.
Totally. And speaking of timeless figures, King David. I always found him fascinating. He's heroic but flawed. What does she make of someone as complex as him?
Well, Bartlett sees his victory over Goliath not just as this amazing feat, but like a powerful symbol. It shows what the human spirit can do.
How so?
His courage, how clever he was, even when facing something huge and scary. To her, that's like our own ability to use inner strengths, our own spiritual wisdom to get through tough times.
So it's about finding that David energy inside ourselves, like facing our own Goliaths.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And just like David had his issues, jealousy, pride, wanting power, we have our own shadow selves to deal with too. We've got to face them if we want to reach our full potential,
Yeah.
spiritually speaking.
It's like a constant back and forth, you know, the higher self, the lower self. Seems like that struggle pops up in so many of these biblical stories.
It does, doesn't it? And what I love about Bartlett is that she's saying those struggles, they're not something to be ashamed of. They're part of being human, a necessary part. They're how we grow, how we change.
It makes me think, if we can find this other layer of meaning in the Bible, what about all those other stories, you know? The ones passed down through time. Could they have hidden wisdom too, just waiting to be found?
That's the exciting part of what Bartlett's doing. She's giving us this new way to see, not just the Bible, but the entire world around us. It's like, what if we question what we think we know? What connections might we find if we just look for them?
It's like she's saying, here's a map, go explore. But we aren't hunting for gold or anything. It's more like we're searching for self-knowledge, for spiritual understanding. So much to unpack here. We've journeyed from Genesis to, well, reinterpreting some of those major biblical figures. What's the big takeaway here? What does Bartlett want people to get from seeing these stories in a totally new way?
It all comes down to symbolism, you
Yeah.
know? Bartlett's showing us that these figures, these stories, they're more than just characters on a page. They embody these universal truths about us, about our spiritual journeys, the stuff we all struggle with, the victories too.
It's less about what literally happened way back when and more about like finding wisdom that still applies today.
Absolutely. It's like, can we see those same patterns, those same spiritual lessons playing out in our lives now?
You know, I've always struggled a bit with reincarnation, but when you put it like that these figures could represent these energies that keep coming back, it does make you think, huh, like what if those souls, those energies are still evolving, still showing up in different ways, maybe even affecting us now?
It's a great question, isn't it? And that's what I love about this book. Bartlett's not giving us all the answers, right? It's not like, here's what to think. It's more like she's giving us a new way to think, a framework to dig deeper, make our own connections, find what those stories mean to us.
Like we're given permission to engage on a deeper level.
Exactly. Forget the dogma, the literal interpretations. What speaks to you? Where do you feel it in your soul?
It definitely makes biblical symbolism feel less intimidating, more like an adventure.
That's the spirit. Bartlett's showing us that searching for meaning doesn't stop with the last page of the Bible. If anything, that's just the beginning.
This deep dive really has been eye-opening. Bartlett's book just shot to the top of my reading list. But even beyond that, it makes you think, if we can find this hidden depth in the Bible, what else are we missing? Like in our everyday lives, you know, what symbols are right there, but we're not seeing them?
It's something to consider, isn't it? Maybe those little moments, bumping into someone, the dreams that stick with you, maybe they mean more than we realize.
Wow, like there are messages, insights right there if we just open our eyes to them. So much to explore. This has been amazing. Thanks for taking this deep dive with me.